Hi, I'm James Mahoney. This video is designed to supplement an in-person class. Grab the nice cube, the nice box, I called it. Put it into your world. Might want to scale it up. So why is this nice? Anybody tell me? Why not use the regular one? It's got beveled edges. So it's a little nicer. It looks a little more natural, right? And those of you who take 22 know what I'm talking about. I mean, that looks so much nicer than without it. It just catches the light. So if you've loaded the materials, the images that I asked you to, I want you to create a new material. Call it stone. And drop it onto that cube. Onto that nice box. So the first thing that you need to decide when you're doing materials, and I know you guys have done this a little bit, so I'm going to go pretty quick, okay? But the first thing you want to decide is what kind of render pipeline, what kind of shader do you want? And most of the time you're using lit, but not always. And we'll talk more about when you don't use lit. But for this one, you're going to say, I want to use lit. Then the next thing is you work from top to bottom. The next one is the workflow. Do you want to, is it a metallic kind of thing or specular? And the difference is, the only difference is what sliders and things you have. If I go to this one, I have a specular map and I have smoothness, right? I don't have, that's all I can change. If I go back to metallic, I have a metallic map, I have a smoothness, but I also have this metallic slider, which how metallic is it, obviously. So you have to decide if your object is a little bit more metallic or not. So in this case, I'm going to go to specular for this. I think that might be the best. And then I'm going to go to images, and I'm going to use the stone one. So I have the stone color. This actually is how I'm more likely to work. I'm more likely to work with starting with the normals or even the gloss. Let's start with the gloss this time. So if I grab the gloss, the normal, the stone norm, and I have to find this normal map right here. And if you watch the video, you understand exactly what this is doing. It's a great trick. And I drop that in there. And then I look at it, I'm like, oh, that looks terrible. What's wrong with that? Right? And so here's the thing. It's the normal map is broken. Oh, and you used to have to just recognize it and then fix it yourself. Unity's gotten so good that at some point a couple years ago, they added this new button. It recognizes that it's broken. It doesn't know that it's a normal map, thinks it's a regular image. And so if you hit fix now, it'll fix it. The other thing I see a lot of is, so then you have how much of this? This is like bumps, right? So it's pretty fancy trick, right? Because it looks like there's more geometry there, but it's just normals. If you have this, what's nice about it is when the renderer, the algorithm, the math that's used for rendering is always looking at the surface normal. And the surface normal points out directly from any polygon, from any face. So someone came up with the idea, well, why don't I just use a texture map to move that normal around? And it looks like there's geometry there where there isn't. It's a great trick. So you can come up here and you can adjust this number. Anyway, you can adjust this number. If it's too bumpy, you can go like 0.3, and it's a lot less. You can also go negative. Sometimes you'll look like if you have bricks, typically the space between the bricks goes in, but if it looks like it's coming out, it's probably inverted. So you can always come up here and you can say, -1. So a lot of times I'll see bricks and stuff that looks like that. And it's just that you see what I'm saying? It's just that it's sticking out. And there are some brick types like that, but typically that means your normal map is inverted, okay? So try to fix that. A lot of this is just looking at what you're doing. And then if you do something like that, that's way too much, right? That's way too much. So it turns out for this map, 1 is probably about perfect. So the next thing I would like to add is the gloss. So I happen to know that I think this, I have 2 versions of the gloss. You can see them down here. I have the regular one, but I also have one that has a little more contrast. How did I create that? I just dropped it into Photoshop and put a curves on it, and I made it a little contrastier. So it's better for a lesson, but you can decide which one you want to use for your stone. I'm going to use the contrastier one, and I'm going to drop that into the specular map. And just to see what it's doing, I'm going to turn this one off. But I often will do this. I'll often try to get these maps nice and set up the way I want them before I add the color. Because once you add the color, it's harder to see this stuff. But can you see what it's doing right now? It's showing that some of these faces are glossy and others are not. So then lastly, I add in the normal. So just that's pretty good, right? You can kind of see that that's a pretty good looking stone already. And then lastly, I'll add the color, the albedo. And the combination is pretty nice. It's pretty telling. And then the other thing, the last thing you need to do is this scale. Texture has scale. It's really, really important. If you look at a wood grain, we all know how big that grain should be, right? And again, it's so simple. You just have to take the time to look at it and then make a choice as to whether the scale of your textures is right or not. So for this one, I'm going to scale this, make it really big. Let's make this really big. So what do you think of the scale of this texture? You can tell by the nature of the texture itself how big that would be. How big would you expect this block to be? An inch? 10 inches? 5 feet? It's not anything. Right? It's clearly not an inch, and it's clearly not 100 feet. Right? So where should it be about? So I'm saying this looks like it's a little too large. So I come down here and I'm going to fix that. I'm going to take the tiling and I'm going to tile it a couple times until it looks right to my eye. So that's probably about as big as it could be, but even a little smaller might be a little more accurate. That's probably about how big those are at the max, right? If I go a little bigger, say 6 by 6, that's possible. That's possible. That's like a terrazzo flooring, right? So why doesn't everybody do that? Get an image just like this where you can see the scale figure, you can see the scale of this, and you can see the nice, glancing light so you can really see the mapping. I think I like it a little bigger. This looks a little more monumental, like if you're at a Roman ruin or something. Yeah, so that goes in the specular map. So I changed the workflow mode to specular instead of metallic, and then it goes into the specular map. The specular, if you watch the video on rendering whenever, you should know what all these terms mean, what specular means. There's also, all of this stuff is in the lecture notes for rendering. So also think about the image, like for instance, have a nice skybox, make sure your quality of your directional light is good. When you save your image, make sure you have some, like you wouldn't want to show that image, right? Because you can't really see the texture. That image is kind of nice. That's not bad. See that nice bevel edge? But you can always adjust the lighting. Go back to your directional light. I have the directional light, I set the color. I have the color a little bit warm, and you can change the intensity. You can bring it up or down. You also may want to turn off your global volume. The global volume will have a big impact on it. It has bloom, but it also might have tone mapping. If you have tone mapping on, you just decide, do you like that tone mapping or not? You can always adjust these. We'll talk about those probably early next week. So you want to take it like, in order to show the textures, you want to have, I'm looking into the sun. You're looking into the sun so you get that nice, see how the light is reflecting off of it? If you have the light behind you, you don't see the textures as much. All right, make a 3D object, make a sphere. And put this also kind of near the guy somewhere. A random sphere and make it a little bigger. And now we're going to create a new material, and this material is going to be call it rusty. So this is just like the last one. It's just a chance to kind of exercise your muscles. Whereas for the stone one, we used, in that material, we use, it's render pipeline lit, but we set the workflow mode to specular. This time we're going to take for rusty, we're going to use the same one, but we're going to use the default, the metallic one, okay? And so for this one, again, let's kind of do it the same order that we did it before. So let's start with the rusty metallic map. This is, yeah, so I'm doing it, creating a new material called rusty. And in rusty, what I've dropped in is in the material, in the metallic map, I've dropped in rusty metallic map because I want to see it alone so I can see what effect it's doing. Right, that's just a good workflow. You can test things out. So if I wanted that to be a little bit stronger, which I think I do, I right click on it, I say show an explorer, shows an explorer, and then I right click on that and I say open with Adobe Photoshop. So there I have my map, and I'm just going to hit Control or Command M, and now I have my curves. I'm going to bring this in. I'm going to bring this up. So I'm just making it contrast. I click in the middle. It's just making it really so it's much more clear. All right, and then I'm going to hit OK. Okay, so now I can take this contrasty one. I go back to my material and I go to rusty. And instead of that one, I'm going to swap in this other material. Contrasty. Wow, that's a lot of contrast. The smoothness is going to say how shiny it is. Well, that's the last thing you do is change this one. So now I'm going to bring in the normal map. And again, I look at that. I have to fix it, right? And then I have to adjust the amount. So in this one, it's a little bit too strong, I think. So I want to bring that down. So I'm going to say 0.6. So I know you guys use Substance Painter, things like that, but you really have to know how, if you want to do this professionally, you have to understand how this stuff works and be able to do it manually. You can always use materials that are already set up for you, and you can buy materials, but if you really got to get used to how these things work and get a sense for it. So now I put the rusty color on it, and I'm left with that. So I think what I want to do is I want this sphere to be kind of big, so I might want to tile it twice. Yeah, that's better. So tile it twice. So then when you have those things all set up, you get a sense of what's going on here, right? And then the last thing you want to do is the smoothness. So if I bring this smoothness up, you'll see that where the metallic map says it's shiny, it's going to be shiny. And so you want to get that to be just about right. If I set it way up, right, it's going to reflect the environment. But notice that it's not actually reflecting the environment. It's reflecting the sky map. And so let me show you the way to fix that is I do this, because you have to do this for everything that's shiny. You'll do this 1,000 times, everything that's shiny. It's another thing, I look at this when I'm looking at your assignments, I look, oh, did they add a reflection probe? Right, and you can tell. So now to add a reflection probe, I just come up here and I say game object, light, reflection probe, and it puts it, in the center of the screen. But I want it in the center of the sphere because I want it to just, I don't have to. It's all right. Reflection probes can intersect things and it kind of does the right thing most of the time. It's actually a point. You have to think where the center of the reflection probe is. That's what's important. So if I take the sphere, I can right click on transform and say copy position. And then I click on the reflection probe on its transform. I right click and I say paste position. That's just one of those things you do all the time. So it's a good thing to know. It should be just like muscle memory. So then I have the reflection probe, and then I want to bake. I want it to render. It doesn't show me anything. It's kind of empty right now. So in order to fill it, what it does is it looks around. I think I covered this in the video on. Was it in the video? Yeah. So it just does a rendering all the way around of what it can see. And so instead of actually trying to calculate a real reflection, now it's a lookup. It's a lookup into this spherical space. Okay, so to bake it, but here's the thing. I think I have to set all these things to be static, right? Because you don't want to bake something into a reflection that's moving around. So if you select this and you select this for the box, it's static for the ground, select the reflection probe and hit bake. And it should look, and then you'll see it down here. And then you can always check. You say, well, do I have everything in here that I need? Yeah, that's good enough. Yes. Doesn't have to be. It's going to, like, wherever it is, just you can try it in somewhere else. Like, for instance, if I move the reflection probe, it still works. Like if I put it here, if I put it here and I bake, it's not going to see this because this is not set to static. But if I bake it now, you'll see that it's just a little different, right? And your eye's not going to be able to perceive that. If I set this to be static, now it sees itself in there, right? So that would actually be a little bit wrong. So in other words, now when I look it through here, if I made this really, really shiny, you can see that it's reflecting itself. Can you see that? So that's a little bit wrong, but it's pretty subtle. The other thing about reflection probe, there's a lot of other things you can do in here. You can, whether you want the skybox or solid color, you have a few other things that you can do that are set. The resolution, like if you're doing something that's really, really, really reflective, like a mirror, you want to bring up the resolution, but we'll talk about that another day. What I want right now is everybody to take a picture, and it should look something like, that. That looks pretty good. Yeah, so you can turn the reflection probes on and off with this button. Reflection probe like this. It's not on an object, it's in space. It's just saying, from right here, this is everything I can see. And then all the other shiny objects that are near it are going to just use that, and there'll be an error, right? If it's right dead center, there's no error. But if it's a little bit offset, there's an error, but your eye doesn't catch it until it's really big. So you have to decide for yourself, like, okay, over here in this, or inside the room, I put one in the middle. But then when I go out into the lobby, I need another one out there because it's going to look different. And so you kind of think about the space, not the object. Yeah. And so it works like this. Did you watch the video? So it works just like the way it said in the video, is that the ray hits an object and says, oh, it's reflective. Now it calculates a direction for a ray, right? So then instead of actually shooting it out into the world and seeing what it hits, It just takes that direction, takes the probe and says from the center of that probe out to that direction, what does it see? And it uses that data. And so how much data does it have? Depends on the resolution of your reflection probe. The resolution is right here. This is the resolution of the reflection probe of that. It's just a map. It's just an image. But we've replaced the computationally expensive calculation of sending a ray out into the world and seeing what it hits. And of course, it's recursive. It hits something else shiny, reflects again, hits something else shiny, reflects again, right? That's so expensive. You're just replacing that whole process with just looking it up in a map. It's just an index into a map, and it filters. It does like a box filter or some kind of a filter on what it hits. And then that's what it'll add that into what it sees as a reflecting in the object. So then how much of that you see depends on how shiny the object is. Yeah, it depends on the properties of the object. So it depends. Depends a little bit on the metallic, how much metallic it is, and you can experiment with that. Let's just take a new object. So for this one, I'm going to say let's make this super shiny. So because it's, you can kind of see if the metallic map, how metallic it is and how shiny it is, how much it's going to reflect. Does that make sense? So if I had an object like this, if I had an object that was going to be that shiny, or even like a mirror, I would put the reflection probe right in the center of that object.